Hi there folks, back again for another video. In this one we're going to be diving into a little bit of historical wargaming chatter. I've mentioned games of this ilk before in the past when I've done another video, which you should be able to see linked towards the end of this one. But I'm no stranger to historical wargaming. I've done bolt action, I've done saga, I've done some medieval stuff as well in the past. But I thought I'd dip my toe back into the world of historicals, and I've been watching a lot of things like Vikings Valhalla and reading a load of books and diving into a lot of podcasts and radio shows about the Dark Ages as well. There's a really nice essay series on the BBC which is all about different characters and peoples from within the Anglo-Saxon era and sort of dispelling myths about them and telling people about all the different sort of quirky things that happened in their lives. And it's been really fun and sort of dragging me back towards the idea of historical wargaming as a premise. I've played, as I say, Saga in the past, and I have access to the first edition rules and things, but the game that I wanted to focus on in this video is one that I think is a great introduction to historical wargaming, but also a nice reintroduction to it as well, based on its model count and its ease of rules and everything like that. And it's one that I'm going to be using to sort of get myself stuck into it, I think. So this is Ravenfeast, as you can see on the screen in front of you. A set of Viking Age rules that came from Little Wars TV, who do great videos on all sorts of historical periods. And this has been designed, as I say, to be a great introductory set of rules for playing historical wargaming. So if you've never done it before and you want to dive in and give it a shot, this is a great way to do that. If you've watched shows like Vikings or The Last Kingdom and you want to play out some of the moments that you see in those shows, then this is a great option for you to do that without having to spend anything, because it's entirely free and everything you're going to be seeing here is available to download. I'll have all of the download links down below as well, so you can go check that out. Just say this, in no way is this sponsored or at all. I'm just picking this up because I really like the rules and I want to dive back into playing historical wargaming, and this seemed like the easiest way to do it at the moment before going that next step. So what is Ravenfeast and how does it work? So Ravenfeast has been designed so that it works as a very low model count game, or you can play it with many more figures if you want. It's D6 based. It uses 28mm miniatures, although you could use a whole range of them if you wanted to. You could play with 15mm. You could play with even smaller than that. I've seen people play with 6mm. As long as everything's okay in terms of the base sizes and stuff, everything should be fine, essentially, when you dive into play the game, which I think is really cool. And the rulebook kind of walks you through the very basic steps of how to build a warband, how to get started, talks through the mechanics, which are very simple and easy to learn. And then sort of sets out some scenarios for you to play as well, including and also looks at things like painting guides and how to build terrain and everything like that, which I think is really nice. The basics of playing, and this is quite a nice little sort of guide actually. I like that they've kind of set up a sort of a way in for people, a sort of starter option. So you're going to have a Viking leader, or it could be a Anglo-Saxon leader or a Norman one if you wanted to. There's rules for playing with them as well as playing with the Vikings later on in the PDF. You'll need some D6, a tape measure, some counters as well, which will mark people who've been wounded, and then obviously you'll need some terrain and a play space. Most games are going to be played out on a 4x4 space, which is nice and easy to dive into and have a look at. Lots of people create mats for that, or you could just use a coffee table if that's what's available to you at the time. As I say, the game kind of works with this idea of you playing with about a dozen or so figures to begin with, but you can sort of scale it up if you want to and play around with it, which I think is quite nice. So it's set around the time of the height of the Viking era. So this is when they were raiding England, Ragnar Lothbrok and all that kind of stuff. But you could easily take this all the way through from kind of like the 700, 800s right up to 1066 and the Battle of Hastings and the fall of the Vikings and the end of the Anglo-Saxon era as the Normans took over. Essentially, it gives you quite a lot of carte blanche for you to do whatever you want really with it, which I think is quite nice. So just to go through rules and sort of get your head around things. So there's a couple of different phases in the game, well, 6 in total. You start with the initiative phase. You just roll a dice to see who's going to be going first that turn. Nice and simple, easy to go. It's kind of tweaked by your leaders and heroes that you have in your warband. So I think it's quite nice. So sort of like the people who are leading and having more command figures means that you'll be able to sort of take control of the battlefield quicker and all that kind of thing. So it's a nice way to sort of bring in that heroic element to the battles of the Viking Age. And then you have a rally phase where you're going to be rolling against your morale of your troops. And if they fail, they will be running away. We'll talk about a little bit more about that in more detail. Movement's very simple. It's all dictated by whatever's on your cards or whatever you've chosen for your particular characters on their roster. And then you have a shooting phase, nice and simple. A melee phase, which is really cool, and we'll talk a little bit more in depth about that in a second. And then you will have the end of turn phase, where you'll see what happens to the casualties that you've taken during the game, which I think is really neat. So this is a great sort of page to kind of go through the rules a little bit more in depth. So movement, as you can see, all dictated by inches. So you just move around 6 inches, 8 inches if you're a thrall. Getting a little bit sort of frisky as you're running around in your light armor. You can also have cavalry in the game, which moves around 12 inches, which is quite neat. Your missile value then dictates what you need to roll to hit on a d6, and you're going to be trying to roll under your value, which I think is quite important. So yeah, I'm just going to check that. Yeah, it is under, isn't it? Yes. It equals or to a lower than the roll, which is always good. So for example, as you can see here, an archer has a missile rating of 2, so they need to roll underneath a 2 or under on a d6. And the same with thralls with their spears. And you can see that they've counted in there 18 inches for a bow of some kind for the Bondi archers there at that point. You then have your melee skill. So your melee skill, again, is based on a d6 roll. You need to roll equal to or under that in order to score a hit. Your opponent will then roll a armor roll, where they will try and roll equal to or under in order to try and shrug off the wound. So as you can see, Jarls are pretty tough. They only need to roll a 5 or under in order to succeed, whereas someone like a thrall, who's essentially just wearing their sackcloth, they have to roll pretty well in order to get out from under the axe of a charging Viking warrior. You've then got your morale, which again has the same system of use. You roll a d6 and try and get underneath that, otherwise you will run away. And then you have a couple of traits for the game as well. So tough means that your figures can sustain more wounds. Normally in the game, regular warriors can only take 1 wound and then they are gone at the end of the phase. But people like your Jarls and your Huskarls, or whoever you wanted to build, if you wanted to build like a legendary character like Ragnar or Harald Hardrada or Godwinson or William the Bastard, then you could give them tough and give them additional runes and that kind of thing. You've also got a couple of additional abilities. So you've got leader, hero, and mighty, and then tough there at the bottom as well. They all have points cost, so you just simply add them onto the points cost. So if you wanted to make a berserker leader, it would be 30. You'd add on 15 points for making it a leader, and away you go, which is cool. And then that leader can spread their morale further around them in sort of like an aura, much like in many other games. The thing that's really nice about this game, though, is that it's been made very beginner-friendly. So in most games that you play, you will attack somebody, and if you wound them, they're gone, and they don't get to attack back. In Ravenfeast, you attack your enemy. If they fail their armor check, they still get hurt, and you put a little blood drop next to them. But then, or any token that you have available, like a dragon poo or whatever. I think that's what they call them now still. Is it still dragon poos? Crystals, whatever. Or something relevant anyway to mark that they've been wounded. And then they get to attack back, but at the end of the phase, they're going to be removed when they are wounded. So it's kind of cool. So it's a really nice way for you to kind of allow everybody that you have on the table to fight, but then but then people are going to be removed anyway. So it kind of creates this nice little sort of chaos on the chaos of battle on the tabletop, which I think is quite cool. So there's some nice stuff there. So as you can see, the Wounded Viking may still complete all phases of the turn, including any attacks of their own. Wounds are not applied until the end of the turn. It's considered that they've got kind of like I guess like a flesh wound. They've taken an axe to the leg. It's bleeding out all over the place. They still get to strike out and attack, but eventually at the end of their sort of blood's going to leak out of their body and they're all going to fall to the ground and die. You've also got a couple of other really fun things. So when people run away from you, you get free attacks. So if they fail the morale check, you get to strike them in the back to hit them, which is quite cool. And there's also the really nice little rule for a death worthy of song. So in melee, if you roll with a 1, which is like the best of hits, and they roll to defend with a 6, which is the worst of armor rolls, then you get to hit them with a like mighty blow that maybe cuts off a head or chops off an arm, or your sword goes straight through their shield and into their neck, and then you pull it out and blood goes spraying everywhere. What happens with that is because you've done such a miraculous, mighty kill, it will have sent blood gouting into the air and everyone will be cheering and all that kind of thing. So all the figures around that person who's just died are going to have to take morale tests at the end, which kind of really adds to this kind of Hollywood element of things, which I think is quite nice. So again, a little bit like with the larger game, Saga, there's this element of it being historical, but to the degree where it's kind of like inviting you in with that kind of Hollywood style element and then giving it a history at the same time, which I think is quite nice. So it kind of caters to those people that want to play it a little bit more saga-y, fantasy-esque before going into playing it properly historical, which is nice. There's also shield walls and all that kind of thing as well, which is quite nice. So there's some extra rules for using them. You can check out all of these in more detail once you've checked out this video. Don't leave just yet. I know this is good though. There's a couple of additional rules as well that have been thrown in. One of the nice things is that you can build characters using a sort of points matrix. So this is something that exists in other games. I think they have it in Blood Eagle, I think, as well. But with Ravenfeast, you can build your characters. So say you've got a particular hero, like the one you can see there, who has a couple of different weapons, maybe not armoured in a particular way that is catered for by the rules already, where you can just kind of make your warrior based on this little matrix here. So if you want them to be very quick, so maybe they want to move 8 inches, that costs 2 points. If you want them to if you want them to have a good missile score, then obviously you're going to be paying for that. Same for melee as well. You can also buy extra attacks as well, which is quite cool. So you can play around with that, which is neat. And then you can change their armor and their morale and everything as well. So if you wanted to make a leader, obviously you wanted to pay quite a lot of points for it, but it means that you could make it like a whole bunch of like pretty badass characters to use in your games, but you're only going to bring 3 or 4 of them to the tabletop, which I think is quite cool. Games are normally played, I think it's like 300 to 500 points for your first couple of games. I think I made a couple of 500 point war bands, and they were around a dozen figures, maybe 13, 14 figures in total, which is quite cool. You also got rune cards and geld. So with rune cards, we'll just go to that now. So rune cards, you get a couple of them given out at the start of the game. It's usually about 2, although there are some other ways to get them. And they're essentially like an additional kind of mechanic to throw into the game. So they have specific effects. You spend the card, you do the thing. So reroll, last dice roll. A normal wound just taken is death worthy of a song. The target figure gains mighty until the end of the turn. And you can use these to kind of swing the game in your favour if something comes up that you need to get out of. And they're all quite handy, and they're nice and quickly usable. So you're not going to find you're going to pick a card and it's just going to not be used during the game, which can always be a little bit of an annoying one. You also get geld, which is another fun little concept to throw into the game. As you can see here, so you get like, if say you can find yourself some neat coins, maybe plastic or metal, maybe you go to like a craft fair or something, or make some yourself using resin or 3D printing. You can offer up geld, so each player has a series of them. You can then spend these tokens in order to get additional rune cards, use it for rerolls, or throw a berserker onto the tabletop, which I think is kind of cool. So you can just spend all of your 3 to just be like, right, throw in a berserker. You've also got the Saxon rules there as well, as you can see. So they're very similar in many ways to the Viking ones, because a lot of people just want to be playing with Viking warbands fighting each other. But you can also play with the Saxons, so you've got options there for playing with a lord, a mounted spearman, a hearthguard, a veteran feared bowman, or just a feardsman. And then you also have the rules for playing in big battles, but we'll get to that later on. And there's also the mythological one as well. There's also a couple of, I think there's 3 scenarios. Yeah, so there's 3 scenarios for you to play. There's two 2-player ones, and then one for more if you want to play with that. They come with nice, fun objectives for you to dive into and play. They'll be really good entry-level games that actually have objectives in them rather than just being just kill everybody, which is fine, obviously. But I like to have something that's a little bit more narrative in my games, and this kind of leads with that. Again, you're not going to be playing with massive warbands. For example, the first one's 300 points, but then the other person has 500, so that's probably going to be around, say, what should we say, 14, 15 models versus around 20, perhaps, depending on what they choose to build. You've got one that's 300, and then you've got one that's 300 and 500 again at the end as well, which is quite nice. There's also a couple of extra bits and pieces in the rulebook as well, so you've got some modelling tips, how to paint your Vikings, building terrain, so there's a nice little tutorial to build a longhouse there, and then some options for where you might want to go next with your historical war games. So you can see Saga in there, Hail Caesar as well, which has its Viking supplement, and also some places for you to go and get your miniatures as well, which is quite nice. So yeah, it's a fun little set of rules. They are free, and hopefully as you've seen as I went through this, they're very easy for you to understand and learn to play. It's not going to be as in-depth as many people would want, but as an introduction into historical wargaming, and just having some fun at the tabletop, and also giving you the option to build up something fun first with this and play games for free, essentially, apart from buying the miniatures, obviously. You can take this as your starting point, and then you'll have built most of the things you need to play games like Saga later on. You'll only maybe have to add in maybe double the same again, and you'll be ready to play, which is really cool. And as I say, everything is free. So you get the rune cards, which you can download and print off. You've also got a quick reference sheet, which is that one there, which comes with everything you need to know. There's a little sample breakdown of all the Vikings that you can play as if you don't want to make your characters yourself. And then there's also just the rundown of the turn, which is cool. You also have some additional rules that they brought out as well. So if you're like me and you wanted to dive into playing but with something a little bit different, because I played Vikings when Saga first came out, and I really enjoyed playing with Vikings, and I played a couple of games with them, really good fun. But I think a lot of people will have Vikings, and so what I decided was that I would come back into historical wargaming and back into the Dark Ages with a look at playing with the Normans. So I picked up some Normans from Victrix, which you'll see in another video. We'll do a little breakdown of them and what they're like. But I'm going to do Normans and Anglo-Saxons and do something based around the idea of sort of 1066 and the Conquest era. There's also the Barons' War Conquest, which is a really fun little set of rules to play. That's from Andy Hobdy, who has done some really good rules, and there's a really wonderful range of medieval miniatures done by Paul Hicks. But as I say, the Dark Ages is something that I'd be interested to dive into a little bit further with rules like that. But this gives me a good solid starting point playing with the Normans, as you can see, who have additional rules there for ride-by attacks and crossbows. And then you also have the Welsh, so if you want to play as the plucky Welsh fighting across the border, you also have options to play as them with additional rules made for using them with Welsh bows. So you can have your longbowmen fighting from the mountains and shooting down on you. But yes, so you've got rules throughout all of these, again for free, focusing on Vikings primarily, followed by Anglo-Saxons, the Normans and the Welsh. Because of the points architecture and the way that they've built the kind of build your own thing, you could easily look at creating other factions. So if you wanted to make Yoms Vikings, if you wanted to make Scots, if you wanted to make Bretons and everything else from Saga, you could easily do that. If you wanted to make Russ, easily done. Just take the miniatures that you've got and sort of stat them up based on what weapons and armor they're using and the historical period that you're fighting in, which is kind of cool. A couple of additional things, so we'll come to that in a second actually. So if you want to stick in 28mm and you want to start playing with fantasy characters, then you can also pick up Ravenfeast Myth and Magic. And this is a additional supplement that's not very long, but comes with additional things for playing with magical abilities, as well as heroes and monsters and everything else in between. So you can have mighty weapons like the sword that Hrunting, that Beowulf uses in his old sagas, and all sorts of different things like that. And you can have magical abilities as well, so you can create necromancers and sorcerers and everyone else in between. Here you can see a breakdown of it, adding in spells and mystics and the different spells that you can cast, as well as enchanted items. I love the idea of like the obsidian dagger and the gilt amber belt and stuff like that. And there's also a range of additional Norse monsters for you to fight with, so you can go up against dragons, frost giants, trolls, draugr and wolves. And all of them come with additional abilities and things that you can use in your games. So if you wanted to fight against the undead, you could do that, which is really cool. There's an additional scenario in there for playing out your games as well. So a nice little supplement that isn't too big, but gives you a option for throwing around some new miniatures and sort of expanding your collection with something a little bit more fantastical if you wanted to go down that route. Again, same mechanics as you've normally seen in Ravenfeast already over the last little while watching this video, but obviously with a few additional special rules in there to make it more magical. There is also, if you want to stick with the historical side of things, the 1066 Big Battles little supplement. So this was based on a series of videos that they did where little wars played out Fulford, Stamford Bridge, and Battle of Hastings, but they did this with smaller miniatures, so they use, as you can see there, 15, 10 or even 6mm figures, and as long as the bases are the same, it doesn't necessarily matter, which is great. And there are a couple of scenarios in here representing each of those big games. So there's Fulford Gate, Stamford Bridge and Hastings. So Fulford was where Morcar was trying to stop the sort of advance force from pushing through, and then Stamford Bridge is the famous one that everybody remembers, where the Vikings got caught short, and Hardrada was decimated by the Anglo-Saxons and their forced march north under Harold Godwinson, and the famous battle on the bridge that everybody knows, where there's a berserker there fighting away. And then there's also Hastings, which was the big, obviously the final battle, where we saw William going up against Godwinson as they fought at the top of the hill, and there was that poor old arrow in the eye. So sad, but there we go. Some nice little options there for people to dive into if you wanted to play some big battles out, and you can use this to kind of lay the groundwork for playing other games if you wanted to in this scale. Just use these scenarios and the rules that they've presented here to represent your different characters on the tabletop. I think it's quite nice. And it's nice to see that they've done something for those people who want to dive in at different scales. And again, making all of this available for free is just fun and awesome. I'll link the videos down below actually that they've done for this, so you can go and watch them and see what they did, because it's well worth having a watch of those, because they're really fun, especially if you're getting into historical wargaming, as I say, and you don't have much knowledge of the period, bar kind of like what everybody else knows. Going that little bit deeper into this is really fun. So yeah, if you want to go and check all these out, there is a website for you to go and have a look at. I'll have this linked down below as well. You've got the Ravenfeast website here, which has everything you need to know about getting started with the game and playing Ravenfeast games on the tabletop. And all of the downloads can be found here. So you've even got some paper models and paper terrain for you to be playing around with as well, which is nice. And it's even been translated into French and Chinese. There's also a Facebook group for you to go and join if you want to as well, which is quite good. But if you are interested in playing historical wargaming, or you're just diving back into it and you want a nice, easy start before diving into something a little bit more complicated, a little bit more expensive, then I would recommend going to check out Ravenfeast from the folks at Little Wars, because it is a lot of fun. Right. I am going to be heading off to get ready to paint some Saxons and Normans and glue some Victrix models together. Oh, they're so lovely. And hopefully you'll have enjoyed having a look through Ravenfeast here with me, and maybe you'll give it a shot yourself in the future. Make sure to go and check out all of those links. As ever, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, do all that good stuff, because it helps out every video and helps the channel continue. And there's also going to be a Ko-fi link down below as well, so if you like what I do and you want to donate, you can do so. Help me out with cups of teas and coffees and little biscuits maybe as well. But you don't have to do that. The most important thing is that you get into the comments and you chat away with me, because I love hearing what you have to say, and I like getting stuck into conversations because you always come up with really fun and interesting things. So yeah, I'm going to be moving on to get stuck into another video, and I'll see you very soon. Bye for now.